Welcome back to Respect the Process. I am Kelly Hunter, and I am sitting next to the voice of the number one football team in America. Not only did you and I watch this game, over 12 million people tuned into this game Saturday night. It was a heavyweight fight that gave us everything we asked for.
It was over 14 million, I think, at its peak audience. It was not shocked. That's why ABC wanted the contract. They wanted everything. That's why they put that game in prime time.
I think it was the highest rated primetime regular season game since 2017. That's what I saw.
Yeah, I think it
Add little caveats here and there.
It
but
was really going to be difficult to live up to the expectation, and yet it did. For these two teams to have a regular season game, and that's been the toughest thing for me this week, is to have all the conversation about it and go, man, nobody's calling asking my ring size.
Yeah.
You know, there's no championship of any type that's been won. Certainly it puts you in a great position. But if anybody thinks, Georgia's out of it, then they're nuts. I'm not saying Georgia doesn't have things that they need to clean up. Obviously, Alabama can improve. But if I said it a week ago, this could be the first of 3 meetings between these two teams. And there's not one thing that happened on Saturday to make me think that it couldn't be that. So, but that game, here's the part that I love.
Come on, bring it down.
Here's the part that I love. There was no championship. There's no inside track to a championship. There's no elimination for anybody for a championship. And yet that was a phenomenal game that here we are 4 days after the fact, 4 days after the fact, and we're still talking about it. We're still getting questions about it. It's still a national conversation piece, even on television. As we're getting ready to go with this podcast, there was something on ESPN about the game still. So that's fantastic. That means that the regular season still has relevancy, it still has excitement, it still has interest. And Alabama is still Alabama. Despite the fact Nick Saban is not on the sidelines, he's in a suite right now or on the sidelines working for ESPN.
I watched. You were there. The atmosphere was electric, even for those of us sitting at home.
It was incredible. And I get asked about, what does it compare and all this? That's really tough for me because prior to, I guess, 6 years ago, I was on the sidelines.
And it is a different experience. It's a different experience and believe me, for those of us that have been fortunate enough to be on the sidelines of a collegiate game, a pro game, high school, it is a different experience when you're down there. It
is. What you hear, how you hear it, being there within the team box as I was for many years as the sideline reporter, and then being up in the booth as a broadcast host before, doing play-by-play for part or whole of the last 3 years. It's very different. And obviously, the noise is taking place. But because of my job, I've got to focus so much as best I can as to what's happening between the lines itself that you still can't fully soak all of that up and take all of it in.
But you do have the job of painting the picture.
I do.
And you do an excellent job of it, especially, again, for those of us sitting at home, because it did translate into just the magnitude and the atmosphere of the game.
And there were moments that I tried to just shut up and let the crowd tell the story.
Yeah.
You can't do that a lot because there are people wondering, but once there are times where you need to let the sound of the event be the sound of the event. It's tough for a radio audience because you often have to tell them what the crowd is going nuts about.
Yeah.
There are moments such as the end of the game, such as after the touchdown occurs when Ryan Williams makes the grab and still does all that he did to get into the end zone to give Bama the lead and ultimately the victory, where you've said what happens and now you need to let the crowd, let the
Let the audience
listener,
absorb.
let them feel like they're there.
Yeah.
Because they're hearing it. So we try to do that as best we can. But it was really special to get that chance, and so thankful that it ended up the way it did, because I've said this many times before, and talking about it from a broadcaster's perspective, I can call a heck of a game technically, and if we lose or we win by 50 and nobody cares and nobody's listening, if we'd won by 50, which it looked like it might happen for a while, that people will play highlights and things like that. But as far as the game itself, I think there's more conversation about it today. And it's better for Alabama today that it wound up the way it did than if they had just boat raced Georgia. And look, it was about to happen. If Georgia doesn't get one of those fourth down penalties or two that they got, as they went for it on fourth down 3 times on their first scoring drive of the second half, which never occurs if that's a 2 or 3 score game. But because it's a 4-score ball game, Kirby's got no choice but to roll the dice.
Yeah.
That's different.
We're going to get to that because they did go 5 of 5 for their fourth down conversions, which is, again, we've got a list that we're going to get to on this thing. But before we move on, I just have to ask, did you see Kid Rock, John Daly, or Herschel Walker, or Donald Trump?
Not in person.
That's a picture that you're going to look at in years to come, and they're going to study that and want to know, how did that happen?
We're going to commercial
and both
break.
of our senators. Both of our senators.
Of course, both senators there.
Can't forget both of them.
Yeah, I hope Tommy Tuberville enjoyed seeing never mind.
Go ahead.
Never mind.
This is a web-based platform. Remember,
it was a familiar sight for Tommy Tuberville. Alabama winning with Nick Saban in the building.
Yep.
Yeah, I realized the whole thumb thing and everything, but once Nick Saban showed up, that garbage stopped. With him anyway. It was almost surreal. We're going to a commercial break, and all of a sudden the Jumbotrons go to a shot of Daly,
Kid Rock, Herschel Walker,
but it was on the sidelines.
Oh, okay.
And it was Hank Williams. It wasn't even Daly. It was Kid Rock and Hank Williams Jr.
Okay, yeah.
And I said, as we're going to break, and I started laughing, I went, "Dear Lord, Hank Williams Jr. and Kid Rock are in the house, and that's just the most perfect thing for this ever." It
just kind of fit the night. Okay, so the first dozen or so offensive plays we know are scripted, oftentimes up to 20 or so. And I think a lot of Alabama fans, it was unreal. It was surgical, the way Alabama went in there, and before Georgia could catch their breath, Alabama was all over them. And I think a lot of people are asking, why did it slow down so significantly after that?
Georgia's that good. That's my
they're going to adapt, obviously, because that's what good coaching does. Right. In game.
And I think that's, I'm not trying to oversimplify it. I'm not saying that Alabama didn't do things that they would love to have back. But I think the reality is, as crazy as it was to think that Alabama would have the type success they did in the first 4 series, you would have been equally foolish to not think Georgia was going to get some things figured out.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And then once they rolled the dice and got some things going on offense to give the defense a little breather and a little hope, I think that changed the dynamic. If you're able to get off the field on fourth down and give your offense a short field, and you stick it in the end zone and make it 37-7 midway through the third quarter or early third quarter, whatever it would have been, I think the whole dynamic of what Georgia is doing and what Alabama does would have looked very, very different. And it's why I think Kalen DeBoer knows that. That's why I think he was so upset and frustrated when it's 30-7 and there's an obvious pass interference call.
Yeah, that is the most animated I think I have ever seen him in the time that I've watched him coach.
May have been the favorite moment of a lot of Bama fans, besides the obvious two plays that occurred in the final 2.5 minutes, the fact that he went off and they hadn't seen that, not that there's been need to,
No.
but just knowing that exists. And as he said, I'm standing up for my guys. I'm fighting for my guys. But, it's easy in that moment to look at it and we'll go, what's the, you got to call that. It's in the, or you can let that go. It's 30-7, whatever. There was no question that was pass interference. It was a terrible call. Alabama had been called for less contact to extend a Georgia drive on a fourth down play that ultimately made it 30-13 because they went for two and didn't get it. So they didn't call, or excuse me, they did call the pass interference there. They don't call it
no call.
When Alabama's trying to. Alabama would have kept the ball and kept the drive alive. You know what Georgia's capable of. That's why you go nuts in that moment, because if you do get that call, you extend that drive and even chew up 4 more minutes off the clock. Forget points, but you chew 4 more minutes off the clock, that can factor on the back end, which it almost did.
Well, and I think for Alabama fans, the offense went out and set the tempo. Defense came out and followed suit.
Right.
And I don't know for Georgia which was better, to have Alabama's offense on the field or Alabama's defense. But that can also be equally frustrating then when you see, they're like, well, I liked those guys that I saw in the first 25 minutes of the game.
Yeah.
And, we talked last week about the middle eight.
Right.
Quick plug, not our sister show that Ryan Brown and Brandon Marcello host on Monday mornings at 8 o'clock, the middle eight.
Exactly.
But the middle eight this week belonged to Georgia. And I think everyone anticipated they were going to come out in the second half. This was not a layover. Like, they were not just going to lay down and die in the second half.
No, you're right. And that was part of the frustration, I think, for Kalen DeBoer. You don't win those 8 minutes, and you do a couple of things that are out of character, or you want to be out of character. The penalty going into the locker room. I
was going to say 10 penalties for 90 yards was not great.
But especially the one where you got a kid coming across the field. Did what he did warrant the penalty? I wasn't in the huddle. I don't know.
No, but it's stuff like that. When you look back, you're like, that could have been
big. Could have been big. So all of these things add up, and any one of them can change the dynamic when you've got two teams that are very equal. And while the score wasn't equal, the teams still were. So while things can swing heavily in your favor at the start of the game, they can swing the other way on the back half, and obviously that's what they did. Georgia led that football game. It didn't happen for long, but Georgia led that game after trailing 28-0. That was a heck of an effort on their part.
Did you ever think the game was in jeopardy?
Oh yeah, I didn't go.
There was a momentum swing. There was a definite momentum swing that was palpable.
I was surprised, but I'll be completely honest. When Georgia threw the long pass, and Bama didn't keep them out of the end zone with 2.5 minutes to go, I was actually glad, because if they get that ball right there and they run 2 or 3 more plays and suddenly you've got a minute and a half or less to work with, that changes what they do defensively. It changes what you're looking at offensively, and that pattern that's thrown to Ryan Williams may not be available if there's less time on the clock. So we know how quickly Alabama can strike. But if you're in prevent mode, then those options are a little, his ability to take it to the house are lessened dramatically.
Well, so many guys stepped up. It was an outstanding game in so many respects, but you look at Jalen Milroe's numbers, which he is almost an entire college's offense, with 374 yards passing, 117 yards rushing, 4 touchdowns. And then in tandem, Ryan Williams, week in and week out, for 4 weeks so far, has continued to show us that at age 17, I'm questioning what my own 17-year-old is doing, because she's losing credit every week. 6 catches, 177 yards, one touchdown, but it's the non-touchdown that probably. Do you think I think Jalen Milroe is definitely in the Heisman conversation, but do we potentially have the youngest Heisman candidate?
Potentially, yes.
Because
Yes.
Lamar Jackson, I did the research project. Lamar Jackson was the youngest at age 19, 11 months, and 3 days.
Yeah, so Ryan doesn't have to win it this year
No,
to be the youngest.
he's got 2 years still.
Ultimately, do I think that happens, barring something unforeseen? Yes.
It'd be great.
Here's the thing to me. He had 6 catches and was only targeted 7 times. So, I mean, everything in his direction pretty much
He was catching.
coming
He
in.
was unreal.
Now,
but what he was reeling in was inspired football.
But those were really, for the most part, great throws as
Right.
well. The play at the end, the touchdown.
And that was the one that Coach DeBoer broke down on the show with you the other night. Yeah.
He did indeed, and showed, and you could see it was awesome. He's
2
telling
inches,
us,
2 inches of daylight and separation. He's showing.
and the fact also that he said, truly Ryan didn't run the route exactly right. Because he's supposed to give more cushion. He's supposed to run that defensive back or lead him a little bit more towards the hash and away from the boundary to give Jalen more room to throw it in a window there. He in essence closed the window a little bit for him, and yet Jalen still drops the pass in perfectly. So that was really, I'm glad you saw that, because that was really special. I thought what we got insight into on that play, everybody thinks, well, he's just thrown it up and Ryan goes and makes the catch. It was a perfectly thrown ball to a less than ideal spot, and Jalen still found the spot, and Ryan, despite not having a ton of room to work with because the defender still brought it in, still made 2 of the best in the league, which means 2 of the best in the country. Miss him, look like Keystone Cops banging into each other, and then able to outrun them. They still had the angle on him. At least one of them still had the angle on him, and he leaves him in his dust.
And that was what I think when you look back at it, you're saying not only is he showing what he is able to do, he's doing it against the best that we have. And that was what I thought was amazing. And then, the other number 2. You're like, oh, the other number 2. Yeah, he was the one, Xavier Brown, who...
And Xavier didn't have a game overall for the day.
No, but you know what?
Ryan did. But he kept hanging in there like the rest of the freshmen. He stepped up. He made the play when they kept picking on him, and then it shows his growth that he's able to make that type of play in that situation.
A lot of the secondary grew up.
Huge. They
quickly.
all did. But I want to go back to the wideouts for just a second. One of the reasons that Ryan is as effective as he is because Jalen has so many other targets available to them. If Ryan Williams is the only viable option at wide receiver,
that's double coverage, and that's all sorts of...
It's a different look for him. I'm not saying he doesn't still make some great plays, but he doesn't make as many, and it's a whole lot tougher for him to get there. You're right, he draws double teams. But Jeremy Bernard has 5 catches. The tight ends are involved. Between Dupree and Cuevas, they had 6 catches. Justice is making a grab out of the backfield. Kobe Prentice is making a catch. I thought Emmanuel Henderson Jr. making, I think, the first catch of the game, or his first catch of the season, going for 34 yards, really had to mess them up. Because I'm sure he's on the scouting report.
Not high up.
But when he makes the first catch of the game, and then you got Kendrick, Jam, Cole Adams is back. He had a huge 15-yard grab to extend a drive. And Robbie Oots had a big catch for 7 yards that I think went for a first down as well. That's
all 3 tight ends. And then
I did 4 + 2 = 6.
That was a good one.
No, it was stealing Ryan's line, but what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 different receivers had 27 total catches in that ball game. That's why Ryan Williams is as effective as he is. He's as good as he is because he's that good, but he has the impact that he does because they got a bunch of other guys that he can throw it to, and they've got three of the best running backs in America in Jam Miller, Justice Haynes, and Jalen Milroe at quarterback is one of the best running backs in America too.
Okay, we're going to do pro, con, pro here. That was a pro. Okay, we're going to go to our cons real quick because I mentioned the 10 penalties for 90 yards.
Mm-hmm.
Georgia was 5 on 5 for fourth down conversions.
Yeah.
Carson Beck's uniform looked just as good in the fourth quarter as it did in the first quarter.
Mm-hmm.
There was not a great deal pass rush. And then also clock management down the stretch. Those were some of the things I've heard because Alabama fans, it was great to win, but we only won by 7.
Yeah.
We only won by 7, and look how the second half looked.
Yeah.
So
I'll go, first of all, I'll just address the last thing you said. I'll go back and check on all my national championship rings.
Would you, please?
I don't think anywhere on any of the rings that any of them say only by.
Only by, okay.
They just have the final score and the championship on there.
By 7.
So ultimately, especially in a matchup like this, it doesn't matter that you only won by 7.
But
all being said,
yes, go ahead.
That all being said, Bama wasn't able to put a ton of pressure on him, but they did on one occasion, got him 2 points.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think the timing of it, the situation dictates that. Georgia's got a great offensive line.
They do. Even in the absence of Rutledge.
Just because you made them look bad for the first 15 to 18 minutes
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that you can or even should be able to sustain that for 60. To me, that's almost foolish to think that you would be able to do it. There's only so many opportunities that a team that's that good will allow to show their weaknesses. And Bama converted on virtually all of those in the first quarter. Mm-hmm. But you're out of your mind if you don't think that that team with a championship pedigree and
the coaching caliber that's on the other side of the sideline. They're going to make adjustments. They're going to make adjustments.
They're going to, and yeah, you have to adapt to the adjustments. But frankly, Alabama did. It took them one play to get the play they wanted to win the game, and then they made the defensive adjustment, and a kid made a play that allowed them to win the football game.
I did feel bad watching their offensive lineman Todd Rutledge on his wheelie scooter. He's like going out trying in the huddle to like coach him up, talk him up.
That's tough. Look, man, it's tough enough as a player to see your team not play at their level. But when you can't do anything physically to help them, that's really tough for a kid.
Well, and one thing, I've said this at every level of sport, my own children and watching this, one thing, you got to learn how to win. You got to learn how to close the deal sometimes. Yeah. And that is not it sounds stupid, but you got to know sometimes when to step on a throat. And that, I think, we saw the beginning of this past week of, okay, we let them get pretty close.
Look, the only thing that I played some high school basketball, but there was never a time where we drew up a play at the end of the ball game for me. Okay. I was on a good basketball team. No, wasn't Jimmy Chitwood. They weren't even going to use me as a decoy. I still think I would have made it, but nonetheless, what I can relate to is playing competitive golf when I was in high school. And you're exactly right. You're talking about teaching somebody to win. You really can't. You kind of got it in you, or you don't. There are a lot of rounds. This is what separated guys like me, who had a little bit of talent but couldn't quite get over the top from kids that did, is that there were a lot of times that I stood on the 16th tee, even or under par, and couldn't finish the round. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of guys that can get really close in a ball game. If you don't think there's a fine line in winning and losing, there is no argument in my mind that one of the two best programs in college football in the last decade is Georgia.
Mm-hmm. And they've proven that.
Georgia, but the reason they've proven they're the second best is because Alabama has more championships and has beaten them 9 out of 10 times. So Bama's only blown them out maybe once. But in every game, they found a way to make at least one more play.
So how does this look from Kirby's perspective?
Tough. Now,
it's another, I mean, I know he preaches. It's
yeah.
another regular season game.
It's another regular season game. He's hoping for another shot at him. When he got 2 shots at Nick Saban, and Nick Saban also lost his 2 receivers that were really good weapons and were the only 2, unfortunately, that seemed to be really dialed in of the veterans. They were the only ones who had been paying attention throughout the course of the year, and the guys that pouted when they got their chance, they didn't do anything, and that's why Alabama lost that game. So Kirby's sitting there going, guys, we can still play our way into a rematch or play our way into the game, and if Alabama gets too full of themselves and slops around in Nashville and something goofy happens, because Vandy's played really well. They're 2-2, but should be 4-0.
Yep.
Very easily could be 4-0 right now. We know that Tennessee is coming. We know LSU is coming. It's the Iron Bowl. It's a road trip to Oklahoma.
Missouri.
I hadn't even mentioned Missouri. Yeah, they're undefeated. So there are a lot of opportunities for Alabama to lose. And Georgia may not get beat again, even though they've got a tougher schedule than they've had at any point in the last 5 or 6 years. But this is far from the finish line. But it was one great ball game on Saturday, especially if you're an Alabama fan.
Were you surprised that they jumped to number 1?
A little.
I didn't see. I thought maybe number 2. I thought number 2 for sure, but I was surprised they leapfrogged Texas.
I think that's part of the respect that the voters have for both Alabama and Georgia.
Yeah.
The fact that it was the primetime game, and the voters may have been working, looking at other games, but they were all watching that game as the ratings indicated. And again, it's early. There's so much time to change that. You know, I don't know who all Texas has played so far, but if you're comparing Alabama and you go, okay, Western Kentucky, but it was 63-0. South Florida, 42-10,
14-17 maybe. 17,
maybe.
yeah.
What ran away from them in the fourth
Yeah.
quarter? 28-3, you outscore them in the fourth quarter. Then on the road, dismantling Wisconsin, not the best Wisconsin team,
It's
but
a Big Ten team,
them,
and yeah, you got it.
dismantled them. One that should have beaten USC Saturday and didn't get it done. So my point is, you look in 1 month and you take the starting point out of it,
Yeah,
and you just look at the
body of work.
You can make as easy an argument for Alabama as you can for Texas based on the 4 games, if you're not looking at where they were ranked the week before.
But, and before we move on, just to say that for Kalen DeBoer, this is a signature win.
It is.
It's a big win at home. The stakes were high. It was against a national championship caliber coach and team.
Right.
And he got the job done.
He did. There were literally all eyes were on that ball game.
Yeah.
It's 1 month in. It's not a ring. They're not getting the statue designed for him on the Walk of Champions yet. None of that stuff. But here's why it's big, and I'm going from being the Alabama play-by-play guy to just being
Chris Stewart.
a talking head guy, in that you got no allegiance or whatever. I know, we all know what the conversation would have been if Alabama doesn't win that game.
That shadow gets a little bit bigger.
Especially after you had the lead.
There was very little talk of Nick Saban this past weekend, other than he was on camp. My point is attached to the game.
No doubt. And there would have been, while you don't want to get too high or you don't want to get too low, the grumblings would have been louder
Yeah.
than even the praise is.
Yeah.
right now, and you don't have to deal with that. There's one thing that I say about certain games, and this is one of them. Sometimes winning feels so good because losing would have felt so bad.
Yeah.
This is one of those times.
I always say that I hate losing so much. I don't even care about winning. I hate to lose more than I love to win. But we turn our attention to this next coming weekend, and it is one of those where, you could talk about a rat trap or some rat poison, or because the Commodores, they don't have necessarily as many 5-stars, but they got a lot of smart guys, and they run a triple option.
It's a defense, it's an offense you don't see a lot.
Yeah.
You have to play disciplined. You can't just assume you're going to go and, it's going to be a cakewalk. They can create some problems. Do you have the maturity to come off of a game where really nothing needs to be said to get you motivated?
But it is a mental adjustment for these guys to come off of last week.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
you didn't have to get motivated to play Georgia.
No.
If you have to be motivated and still can't get motivated, then you've got a maturity problem.
Right.
You got a development problem with your program, so or your team. So doesn't mean you don't have. Again, if you don't play razor sharp, it's understandable. But to again go back to one of Coach Saban's things is that it's natural to be average. It would be typical human nature to take the foot off the gas this week.
Mm-hmm.
But do you want to be average or do you want to be great? And this is where you have a chance to take another step towards greatness if you can fight through the natural human tendency and listen to everybody all week long rather than putting your eyes on Nashville.
Well, they are moving into the meat of their schedule here. I mean, we've got an off week, I think, coming up, end of October, beginning of November, somewhere in there. So they've got, it's...
Hadn't said it in 15 or 20 years, but the toughest game on the schedule is Knoxville.
And it's coming up, but we first have to deal with Nashville.
You're right.
And we'll deal with that one first. We got a 3:15 kickoff. It's on the SEC Network. As of right now, it's Alabama minus the 23, which you and I have said it doesn't mean anything to us because we don't really understand those numbers.
We don't partake.
We don't. But you said this is a wheels-up trip for the football team?
Yeah, they'll fly up.
You'll drive.
I don't want my wheels up.
You'll point north on 65.
I want them to stay on the interstate, and I'll drive up on Friday.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it. Noon airtime.
Yep, I was just going to ask.
On the Crimson Tide Sports Network.
So we'll catch y'all at noon. And always, if you're looking for Chris, we can find him at chrisstewart.online. I know it's been a different week for you, but I know that you have enjoyed regaining your voice.
You know me. I'm going to talk regardless.
Absorbing it, and as you said, the feeling this week is much better.
Well, here's the thing. You've heard me say it multiple times during this podcast. There's a lot more football to be played.
Yes.
It is much easier to say that and not have people look at you like it's an excuse or you're deflecting from what happened on Saturday. Mm-hmm. To say that after a win than after a loss.
Right.
So that's one of the things when you're in my spot. People, if something bad happens, people rarely say anything to the coach. They may say it about the coach. They won't say it to the coach. They have no problem saying it to the play-by-play guy.
That's right. I mean, you're the one telling them, so you have a responsibility in the situation. I get it.
They want to shoot the messenger, but also it's a case where normally they feel close enough relationship, whether we've ever met or not, that they can unload to me, if not at me. So
that's the intimacy of the radio listener broadcaster relationship. We got to thank Scott Forrester for getting out the turpentine and whatever else it takes to make this look presentable, and to Tim Melton for continuing to say there's no such thing as a dumb question and then regretting having said that. Yeah. And, of course, Reed Taylor for handling the numbers so that we don't have to. Be sure and check out Crimson Cover. They've got you everything you need for all of your Crimson Tide needs. The next round every single day. And, of course, Disrupt Media for any sort of content that you're looking for. I'm Kelly Hunter for the voice of Alabama, the #1 Crimson Tide. Give them one last one.
Roll Tide.
Take care. I'll see you next week.